Unfortunately, I think the judge and the jurors are not getting due process either because with the crowd mob mentality and the ability for people to organize on Twitter and docs and like go to their house that day and be like, hey, I'm not in, Louisiana, but you are. Go get this address in Louisiana. They're not safe.
Sure, but if you're like a spineless coward like Judge Cahill, then you shouldn't be a judge.
Well, if in reality, if your choice is he's going to die or I'm going to die, and that's just your job, what are you going to choose?
Well, if you're a coward, you'll let the innocent person suffer to save your own skin. But if you're brave and principled, you will say, I will stand my ground, so be it.
And then
that's
you'll
a lot
die.
to expect from a civil servant. It's
Right. Oh, absolutely.
It may be the standard we should expect.
Right.
Arguably,
but they'll just get replaced.
But it's a lot to expect, and that guy would have to quit being a judge.
It's insane to expect that. No, that's not a way to survive a society.
No,
no, you can't expect the judges to sacrifice themselves.
If every single judge every time said, F you will not terrorize me into putting an innocent man in prison, we would not have this problem.
I don't think so. I think that they would get destroyed.
By who? By what?
By the angry mob. And then the government would put new obedient judges into place.
It's an issue of complacent, spineless, and feckless leadership. The prosecutors who won't prosecute the rioters, the police who grovel and lick the boots of their democratic leadership that sells them out, and you have a system where, as you mentioned, prosecutors are like, I'm going to pass the buck. I don't want to be involved. Grow a spine and go on TV and say, this is what happened. If you've got a problem with it, I don't know what to tell you.
It's part of why we have covert ops. You don't want to know who, or you're not supposed to know who the people spying on you are because they'll go get executed. So you kind of, I don't necessarily think we need like secret judges and juries making these like behind the scenes decisions. But if there was a way to protect their identities, that I think is the future of judiciary, America.
The public has a right to know.
I do agree with that, but only to know that they're real people. You don't need to know their identities.
I disagree. What if the government starts putting up juries of a bunch of tech billionaires, and you're just like, well, they're real people. We know it's true. We don't know who they are, and it's all a bunch of billionaires or gang members or whatever.
You could maybe know.
You don't give the government the power to do that. Government needs to be transparent. The problem is all of these politicians in Minnesota are sitting there thinking like, well, I'm more important than anyone else. I don't care about my community or the betterment of my children's future. I would rather sell everyone else out to save my own skin. That's what they're saying.
Well, I think they think it's a transient problem. I think they're thinking, hey, we got this George Floyd trial going on now, the Chauvin trial. Let's just get through it. We'll get through it. It'll be over. If we can get through it without the city incurring $1 billion in property damage and a bunch of other people getting killed, well, that means we got to sacrifice one cop, maybe not give him perfect due process of law. Well, that's just the price we're going to pay. We're not going to incur those billions of dollars of property, and that's even before you get to their own self-interest, my job, my career, my safety. So they can frame it in their minds as doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And let's face it, it's not like Chauvin fell off a building onto George Floyd. He was actively using force on George Floyd, and they may tell themselves, listen, he took the job as a cop. This is one of the risks, especially in this political environment. He could have retired the year before, right, and not been doing that. And he has that right. No one was making him be a cop. And
that's why I say any one of these cops in Minnesota right now, the next time this happens, Kim Potter, I don't care. They can lock Kim Potter up. What was it? Second degree manslaughter. Was that 10 years?
I'd have to check. It's something in that range, 10 to 20 years.
And then she'll probably get 4 or something because she's no criminal history.
But there's other aggravating factors. So once they decide it's a crime, they convict you on anything. Well, then you're a criminal. And then you committed the crime while in police uniform, wearing a badge. And that becomes an aggravating factor for sentencing. I mean, that's what Chauvin's looking at now. Right. So under normal sentencing guidelines with no priors, he'd be looking at about 10 years, which means he'd get out in like 6 years. But they filed what they call for Blakely, aggravating factors. He was a cop, wearing a badge, in uniform, in front of children, part of a group of people, the other police officers involved. So he could be looking at way more time than 10 years.
Do you think these officers in Minnesota would hesitate to arrest you on a gun charge if you were constitutionally expressing your right to bear arms?
Not if it violated a Minnesota statute. They'd arrest you in a heartbeat.
On the spot.
Yeah.
And so you have these cops that you see the violence and the destruction happening in these places. They also don't want law-abiding citizens to have the ability to defend themselves. Now, I understand the cops aren't the ones who made the laws, but being the ones who enforce it at a time when the city has been attacked, when buildings have been destroyed, the police department is under threat, and they still work to support a system they know is crooked. After everything that happened, they would still, without hesitation, take away your right to defend yourself as a law-abiding citizen. And then, after choosing to stand in a burning building while threatening my rights to self-defense, expect me to defend them? Never going to happen. Kim Potter can go to prison for all I care. She chose this. She knows what the corrupt, spineless politicians are doing. And I have no sympathy for anybody who chooses to stand in a burning building when I say get out and they don't.
Well, a lot of them are getting out. Some
Good
of
for
them,
them.
some of
Respect.
them, they may make different choices. But the fact is, every cop knows that he doesn't work for himself. He's not his own law enforcement agency. He works for a hierarchy of people above him, and ultimately he works for politicians. So his police chief, the guy at the top of his department, that is a political position, folks. That's not a law enforcement position. Just because he wears a uniform and has a badge, he's not a cop anymore. He's a politician now. So ultimately, the cops don't work for themselves. They work for the politicians. If they don't like doing that, then they can't keep the job.
They shouldn't. I mean, after everything that's happened, my attitude is, for one, if you're still going to stay in these cities where all of these problems are happening, it's not just happening in a vacuum. It's not like all of a sudden I'm standing alongside these leftists being like, yeah, all cops are bad. No, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is we had what are we going on now? Almost a year of riots. Now, before the election, we had months of rioting. We had a political system supporting the rioters. We had a Kamala Harris soliciting funds for the rioters, Joe Biden's staff donating funds for the rioters, absolute support for the chaos and the destruction, and an establishment media saying peaceful protests while there's fire raging behind them. And I said, okay, let's defend, our police officers. Not all perfect. Should be police accountability. I respect all that. The trial I get. Let's have a fair trial. Let's have some police reform. The argument didn't work. The people decided that they should vote for those who supported the rioters. We're seeing an escalation or I should say a collapse of our justice system. And there are still to this day cops saying, I'm going to sit here in a burning building. Okay. Well, when the fire started and we all tried putting it out and it didn't work and the fire took over the building, then I said, time to get out of the building, guys. You said, no, I'm cool. I'll stay. I said, all right. So when the building comes down on you, don't expect me to get sad.
It's a real dilemma, right? Because what choices do the cops have? They can stay or they can go. If they go, they're not cops anymore. So they're not helping us there, right? They're not good. Why not what?
How is it not helping? If they're going to stay in a city if they're supporting corrupt politicians and corrupt judges.
I'm just saying, if they leave the job, they're not fighting crime anymore, right? They're not serving that societal purpose anymore because they're no longer police. They've left the job. If they stay, maybe they feel they can still, most of the time, do something for crime. But yes, admittedly, by staying, you're working for the body politic that gives you that job.
And you've got residents of these cities who don't want to do anything to support the police, to express their support for police.
Well, apparently quite the opposite.
Why are people marching?
Well, they're voting for the prosecutors and they're voting for the mayors.
Absolutely.
And they're voting
right.
for the,
they're
supporting the anti-police initiative in these cities.
Then what gives these cops the right to reject the will of the people and think they can stay here and go into these neighborhoods where they aren't wanted?
Well, they can, because the politicians say you can go. Just don't be surprised when we serve you up in the next witch trial. So
these cops,
and the good ones won't stay. I mean, any that can get out with any fraction of whatever they've earned in terms of a pension, they're going to leave. They leave the profession entirely, or they'll join the state police or the sheriff's department, or move to some other jurisdiction entirely. They'll get out while they can. When you look at they had a lot of police testify for the state during the Chauvin trial. None of them were street cops. They were from the academy. They were trainers. Or they were an 80-year-old or 70-year-old homicide detective who doesn't do street work anymore. He shows up after everything's done and talks to witnesses. Or they had a sergeant who, again, shows up after the fact. If there's been certain use of force threshold reached, you have to call your sergeant so he can write a report. But none of them are making hands-on arrests. They didn't call any street cops. You know who called a street cop? The defense called a street cop. Right. The guy who was involved in the first George Floyd intentional ingestion of drugs-related arrest. He was there to attest to the body cam video, and he was like, "Yeah, no, this is what George Floyd does. Should have been entirely expected because this is the same behavior that I experienced." And he stepped right through it. And there's a reason the prosecution didn't call any actual street cops, because they didn't want street cop testimony in that trial. What they got were the cops who were still there, who weren't on the street because they're in the academy, they're in headquarters, they're in senior homicide positions where they're not actually expected to go hands-on with anybody.
I look at what's going on in many of these cities and just think the cops at this point who are staying are propping up a corrupt system, and they're allowing it to persist. And it's more than that. I, for a while, operate under the assumption that regular people wanted police. And I notice a lot of conservatives do this, where it's like clearly people want crime to be stopped. But then I saw the Micaiah Bryant thing. And I saw that instant in New York City where the woman got shot in the head. And I realized something. They're telling us in no uncertain terms, and we're just not getting it through our thick skulls. When a woman shoots another woman in the head in New York, it's not news. No one cares. Crump doesn't show up. There's no lawsuits, no lawyers. No one complains. Cops don't got to do anything. Cops aren't at risk. Cops are fine. The people want to live that way. When Micaiah Bryant is fighting and she pulls a knife and tries to stab someone and the cop intervenes, immediately in that body camera footage, I was amazed to see the people turn at the cops and start yelling, "What did you do? Why did you do that?" It's like, didn't you just watch this lady wind up with the knife? And then I thought to myself, it's clear. They're not lying. They're literally saying, let us have neighborhoods riddled with violence and crime. We want that. We don't want you to intervene. Right. In fact, there was one instance recently where I think someone had their kid killed. I can't remember what the story was. The guy's refusing to talk to the cops about it at all. And he said, we do not want cops coming in our neighborhood, period. And I'm like, then why are cops still doing it? Why is anyone demanding they should? No, the cops should leave because the people have asked them to.
Right.
That's simple.
And of course, every cop knows now that if he does go hand-on with a suspect, the first thing that's going to happen is all the bystanders are going to come to the immediate conclusion that his use of force was inappropriate, unlawful, and those are exactly the kinds of witnesses that were brought up in the Chauvin trial. By the way, they mostly testified about their feelings about what happened, which should not be relevant in a criminal prosecution. That frankly, they should not have been permitted to say those words. When they said those words, it should have been objected to by the defense. I wondered why the defense didn't object at the time. Sometimes there's a broader strategy that pays off later where you don't want to be objecting even when you have the privilege. Unfortunately, I never saw the payback appear later during the trial, so I'm not sure what the defense counsel was there for. They're supposed to testify about facts, their observations of what happened, not their feelings about what happened. We had witness after witness after witness literally gasp and cry and tear on the witness stand. That alone should be grounds for a reversal of this conviction.
Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.